So welcome, ladies, to the first Memoir Mentors author Q&A of 2021. We're so excited tonight to welcome in Lisa Yarger, who, as those of you who are here in Munich know, is the owner of the Munich Readery, and she is going to talk to us a little bit about her memoir this evening. You've all been here with Memoir Mentors for a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Christina, let her introduce Memoir Mentors and Lisa a little bit more in Lisa's book.
Everyone here already knows what Memoir Mentors is, but for our listeners, Memoir Mentors is a community that was started last year with the intent to support, motivate, and inspire memoirists, and to help us take our writing to the next level. We have a really, really wonderful, warm, welcoming group of people. I love you guys. And if anyone else listening is writing a memoir or is just interested in one and interested in joining us, you can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/memoir mentors. But the best way to find us is through Happy Writing Group on meetup.com and happywriting.co online. We meet every Thursday for writing sessions, a book club, reading our pieces out loud, providing critiques. And this year we're planning on having more challenge-based workshops and adding an accountability element to motivate us to complete our books. We recently read Lisa's book, Lovie, The Story of a Southern Midwife and an Unlikely Friendship. I know not all of you attending had a chance to read the book, so Lisa will be providing a summary of her book in a moment. But first, a little bit about Lisa. Lisa grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina in the United States and studied English at Wake Forest University, earned her master's degree in folklore studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She was a former curator at the North Carolina Museum of History, and she and her family now live here in Munich, where they own and operate the Munich Readery, as Jessica had mentioned. They're closed currently because of the lockdown, but you can still support them and order books online from them at www.readery.de. So after, I'm going to ask Lisa to give a little summary of her book in a moment. We're going to dive into the questions that we generated in our book club. And following our prepared questions, you'll have a chance to ask any further questions you might have. So please drop them into the chat. And Jessica and I will be monitoring those best as we can. So without further ado, Lisa, please tell us a little bit about your book.
Thanks. Well, it's not really a memoir, but there are memoir aspects to it. It's a hybrid book because it's really the story of Lovie Beard Shelton, a white midwife who delivered thousands of babies in African-American communities in Eastern North Carolina, starting in 1950 and ending with her last delivery in 2001, so over the course of more than 50 years. And it's a book about her career and life, both of which were remarkable. And it's also the story of our friendship, hence the subtitle. Despite a 42-year age difference and great differences in political and religious leanings. She was a conservative evangelical Christian. I'm not. And we had to sort of figure each other out in order to make this relationship work. It's also the story of a particular home birth that I was lucky enough to be able to accompany Lovie on. All of the deliveries that she did were in homes. And I weave in enough history of midwifery and home birth in North Carolina for the reader to understand the significance of Lovie's life and career. So those are the main storylines, I think, that are intertwined. And yeah, I'm sure a little bit more will come out as I answer your questions.
Yeah, thank you. So first off, I understand you met Lovie while you were working on the special exhibit for the museum and where you worked as a folklorist. And I was wondering, when did you know that you first wanted to write a book about Lovie?
That's a good question. Not right away, but I knew that I wanted to write something. I had just finished, or I was just finishing actually, my master's thesis in folklore studies when I met her at the end of 1996. I actually finished it in the spring of 97, and I knew I wanted to do something creative, and I had a book length project in mind, but no real clue of what it would be, could be. I had an idea that nonfiction might be easier for me to write because I didn't have any fiction ideas, frankly. And I knew I wrote dialogue well, and I knew I had a good ear for dialogue that had developed because of all the oral history interviews that I had done with Lovie and other women, mostly women. So there were all these interesting women that I was interviewing for a particular exhibit, and they all sort of called to me in different ways, but it was Lovie that really drew me, her story, her life, the time that I spent with her, just sitting in her kitchen with her wood stove crackling. I knew I wanted to spend more time with her. So it was within the first year of starting to interview her and me finishing my thesis that I thought, yeah, when this exhibit that I'm interviewing her for is up, I don't want to stop going out to visit her. And I think I want to try to write a book about her.
So you just, you said that you had been considering writing a book before meeting her, and this just felt like the right thing to do. I understand you studied English at Wake Forest University. Did your studies there prepare you for writing a book?
I'm not sure. I never took creative writing classes, a little bit out of arrogance, because I thought I didn't need to learn anything, which was a little arrogance, but also because I think I might have been afraid that if I took one, I wouldn't have been good at it. I had the opportunity to take a class with Maya Angelou. She was a visiting, can't remember her exact title, but she was either a visiting professor or she had a special position at Wake Forest University for the years that I was there. And I didn't take that class.
Oh, no.
I very much regret. But I think in that I was a great reader and I always loved to read. Yes. Being an English major certainly helped me, because I think the more you read, the stronger you are as a writer. And what I think it did help me with was getting a sense for where a scene had just happened. You know, things would happen between Lovie and me, and she would go to bed early on a midwife schedule, and I would stay up late, and I would just write and write and write, and I would start to see where scenes were happening between us, and I would also write all of the dialogue, and I had a good ear for, that was a good line, or that was a punchline, or that was the end of a scene, or an end of a significant moment between us. So all of that went into my notebooks. That was the most fun part of the whole process, frankly, was going out there, visiting her, just hanging out with her, speaking with her off tape, and just off the cuff what would happen between us.
Great. And I recently took a class from you on memoir and personal narrative writing, and I really enjoyed the class and the pieces that you shared in that class. Particularly, like you said, reading really helps formulate what we want our pieces to look like. And I know some of the members in our group have taken other classes from you, and I was wondering if you had any other classes coming up that you'd like to share any information about, and any kind of information as far as what your education or other classes you've taken that have prepared you for writing.
I just led a workshop today that was a lot of fun. It was called Unlock Your Writing, and it was meant to be for beginners and for more experienced writers. And it was so much fun. And I had such a completely full class that I said right on the spur of the moment, I said, I'm doing this again in February. So I haven't picked the date yet, but I'm going to repeat that one. It was basically using the practice of free writing, or some people call it writing practice, combined with writing prompts, to just get people's hand moving across the page without thinking about structure and grammar and is this any good. So people had a lot of fun, and I did too. So I'm definitely going to do that one again. I may even do it every month from now on until the end of time. It was that much fun.
Oh, wow.
And then at the end of this month, on January the 24th, I'm offering something new called Writing Climate Change. I've been trying to figure out a way to combine my climate change activism, which hasn't been great up until this point, but it's been something that's a little bit a part of my life, with writing. And so I thought this would be a way to just introduce the topic and allow me to face the subject with all its emotional complexity, with all the feelings that it brings up with other people. And so I offer that as an opportunity to anyone who's wanting to just take a look at climate change, what feelings come up for us. The goal isn't to end up with publishable writing necessarily, but to figure out new ways to look at the issue.
Interesting. Great. And we can find out more about those classes at the readery.de, right?
Yes, you can, at our
Okay.
website. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Okay. When you're
right, did you ask? And you asked me if I had taken classes that had helped me. And I never have studied creative writing. I once did a really wonderful writing workshop for a week in Paris through the Paris Writers Workshop, it was called. I don't know if it exists anymore. I don't know if it survived the 2008 recession. But if it is still going, I highly recommend it. They get in really great writers. I did one on nonfiction, literary nonfiction. I don't remember exactly what they called it. And Philip Lopate, who, if you've taken memoir classes, you know his writing, because I always use extracts from his, or excerpts from his books in my memoir classes. He was the person that I did this week-long seminar with or workshop with, and that was incredibly valuable to me, both because he liked what I was doing with Lovie. This was in 2004, so it was still a long way between that and when I published the book in 2016, but it gave me a much needed boost. The thing I learned from him that I will just pass on is, somebody in that group questioned that I was writing about this midwife's animals in such detail. And he said, but it's interesting. She should write about anything she can get away with. And I just loved that as a response to somebody saying, but she's a midwife. Why is she writing all about this midwife's donkey and geese? And that was his response. You write with as much detail as you can get away with.
And the donkey and the geese were a big part of Lovie's life. Yes. And I really enjoyed reading about them. And they were, I can see why you wrote about them. They were characters in your story.
Yes.
Taking the donkey to church was for the Ash Wednesday, right? Is that the...
Yes. Or Palm Sunday.
Palm Sunday, right.
Oh, and he's a mule. I'm sorry. I have to identify him properly. Gus was a mule.
Okay. I was thinking. Yeah, I'm really glad you included that. That's a great tip. And those were great characters in your story. You mentioned that it took you, did you say it was 10 years to write your book? Is that?
Oh no, 18.
18.
I met Lovie in 1996 at Christmas time, and I published the book in 2016. So actually it was 20 years from the time I met her till the time that I published it. But the exhibit went up in 1998, and that's when I formally asked her, may I write a book about you? So 18 or 20 years, take your pick.
Did you worry that you were not going to be able to finish?
Oh, yes, all the time.
Mm-hmm.
All the time. I mean, I gave up on it. I started it again. I gave up on it. I started it again. I picked up other writing projects. I picked up other work. I had a baby. We moved to Munich. Many things happened in those 20 years. And if I had anything to do differently, I would have trusted the process more. I had a lot of external positive feedback that I didn't trust, or I would think, oh, that's nice, but still, it's not good enough. And so I do trust the process more now. I'm now working on a young adult novel, and I can't say that I exactly know what I'm doing because I've never written a novel before, but I'm having been through the process of writing a book when I didn't know what I was doing, and finally getting to the other side and it getting published has given me more confidence to realize that possibly that could happen with this project as well. But yeah, I gave up on it quite a lot. I'm lucky that I have a partner who was a big cheerleader of mine and who liked it from the beginning and told me so, and always said, you're going to finish this, and I know you will. So that was helpful.
That's great. And you mentioned trusting the process, and part of the challenge is that each of us has a different process. There's not one way that works for every writer. And so finding the process that works best for you is often a big challenge. And we doubt ourselves a lot along the way.
Yeah.
So another one of my questions was, you considered stopping, but what was your primary motivator to finish?
I would say there were two. I had invested all of this time and energy into this book, and years. I didn't want to give it up. I knew I would feel that I hadn't seen it through, because I on some level, I did always know that it was good and worthwhile, and that I needed to finish it. So that kept me going. And then I felt I owed it to Lovie. She did pass away before the book was published. She died in 2013, but which was 3 years before the book was published, or 3.5. But I did feel like I owed it to her in any case to finish it. She had invested a great deal of time and energy into it as well, and had always hoped that there would be some lasting recognition of her accomplishments, um, her life journey, which was unique and remarkable in the world of midwifery. So yeah, for those two reasons, I didn't give it up altogether.
Good. And I know that you shared some of your story with Lovie before she passed away, and it sounded like, as anyone would want to do, they want to present a really good image of themselves, and I think that would be challenging when you had such a close relationship with her to write honestly and yet to also please her. Did you find that was a challenge, and was that also, maybe, I don't want to say a relief, but was it freeing in some way, to write the story completely when she was no longer there, to try to manage it for you?
My internet connection was unstable at the beginning of your question, so I've moved. But so ask me again if I don't answer exactly what you've asked. It was freeing when she died. In a way, I didn't deliberately wait until she had passed to finish it. I was going at the pace that I could go at. But when she did die, I was able to face the material that was the hardest for me to register in writing, which was her racism.
Yeah.
And she was the product of the place where she was born and raised, and of her generation, born in 1925, a white person in that place and at that time carried a particular set of ideas and assumptions about people of African heritage. She served everyone without questioning. She was the white healthcare provider in that area who was doing the most for African heritage people. One of the reasons she had such a booming practice in the 50s and the 60s, at least the first half of the 60s, was that white doctors didn't want those patients because of systemic historic racism. Those patients didn't have a lot of money to pay for a hospital birth, and they were shut out of hospitals anyway because of racism. And so they needed a midwife, and she was the one who was there. So I when I say her racism, I want you to understand that she was the one who was going to these families' homes and delivering their babies.
And she was inspired by them to get started in the first place, by the midwives.
She was, because her family had some land, and they had Black tenant families on them. This was, a relic from the plantation system and from slavery times, that white families had, land, and they parceled out bits of it to Black families to do the labor, and they got then a percentage of their crops. So yeah, she was inspired by them. What made it easy then for me to write about what was going on was, she passed away, and also I started to reflect on what does it mean to be racist. It helped me to stop thinking of her as the racist one in our relationship. I am a white person. That means I do carry some racist patterns, some racist material. We just get smeared with it. We just do. And so it helped me to start looking at that, and where does that show up in me? And okay, so her racism is more overt than mine, but we share that as two white women, and it gave me a different framework to start writing about her, the conflicts that we had, maybe this sense of superiority that I had, that that I'm the correct one here, the non-racist one here, and she's not. It's complicated. If I had to do the book over again, I would actually delve into this more than I did, but it did allow me to open this up finally, a topic that was sort of just looming there the whole time, and that I didn't crack open until after she had died.
Yeah, we definitely sense that tension through your writing, that it was a big source of conflict between the two of you, the racism and her. It was really interesting for someone who was such an independent woman and who served women all of her life and was single for much of her life after her husband passed away. Yet she wasn't. I think you were kind of thinking she would be feminist, and one might think that she would be by reading this about her life. But I think in many ways you found that she wasn't. And these are all topics that are really, and plus of course your differences in religion was another big topic that was very charged and hard to talk to her about, and hard to write about these hot topics in your writing. And I wondered if you had any. I know that you felt apprehension towards her addressing these issues, but did you also find apprehension just in writing about these topics in general? And what did you do? Do you have any advice for us to help us address these issues in our own writing and present them in a sensitive manner, and also one that challenges us to be more coherent and aware of the patterns that we face as writing as white women in these scenarios and these topics?
I always think it's good to write from, our own identities. I think, for example, the young adult novel that I'm writing, it's a coming of age story of a white girl. It's a coming of whiteness story, in that she's recognizing what her whiteness means, what it is. But what I mean by writing from our identities, I mean, we are women. And I did I have apprehension about writing about all of these things? Yes, to the extent that I didn't write about it all. I mean, the stories that I didn't tell, I find it very interesting that I didn't tell the story of how Lovie earned her own money, the whole career that spanned more than 50 years. A woman born in 1925. I'm a woman born in 1967 who was living off my husband when I was writing, and I had the privilege to be working on a book that had no source of income for years because I was married to a man. And how did I get that status as a white woman marrying somebody, then to be able to enjoy not having to work for money while I did, while I pursued my artistic interests? I didn't write about that because I think I was too in it to look at it. But I think that's an interesting story that I didn't look at. Yeah, I don't know the subject of all of your memoirs, so I don't know how much these issues play a role. I think certainly we're women. We definitely write about being women, and as far as race coming in, it just depends on the story that you're telling, how much that comes in. I don't know, but I think it's always good to examine it. To examine our status as white women and how that plays a role in what we've been able to do in our lives. But I don't know if it plays a big role in the stories that you're telling. It might play a role in the way that you're able to tell about what happened to you. It's hard. These things, I don't have a cookie cutter answer for you.
Right.
It's hard material.
Yeah.
But I do think we owe it to our readers to be as authentic as possible. That doesn't mean we tell absolutely everything about our lives. Some things are for us and us alone. But I do think we owe it to our readers to try to tell a true story. And we can debate for hours what that means,
Right.
but to be authentic as possible. And I just think I think it's great that you have this group of women memoir writers, because our stories are important. They're not told enough. The more stories that women tell, the better, as far as I'm concerned. So I applaud you for gathering and for backing each other and supporting each other. I think that's a marvelous thing.
We do actually have a few men that are writing memoirs as well. It's primarily women, but we do have some men in the group as well. It's been, and that's actually really rewarding when we do have a mixed group, that we can get both sides of the story and get some opinions on how these stories are perceived by the opposite sex. Yeah, we've got a lot of stories to share, and I'm really happy to be part of hearing everybody else's stories in our group, and really want to get those stories out in the world. Back to Lovie, and you know, when you're writing a biography, it's not necessarily standard practice for the author to include themselves in that narrative, but yet I found your personal insight and experiences especially compelling in the book, and I found myself wanting to know more of your story. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how you decided to put yourself into the story, and how did you decide about which parts to share about your life and which parts not to?
That's a great question. I think I knew pretty early on that I would be in the book, because the part of the process that amused me the most, and I use that word intentionally because I was just delighted by Lovie. I was entertained by her. And so the parts of the whole process that amused me the most were the things that happened between us. And so I was her foil, you know, that term for, you know, that we use when we're talking about fiction, but I was her straight woman too. You know, she would tell these jokes, and she had a sense of herself as being funny. Um, hmm, I think I knew pretty early on, because I was, you know, as I said, visiting her and writing down these scenes, and there had to be the dialogue, and you had to know who were these funny lines going to, right?
Yeah.
And how are they coming out, in what context? So I knew I would be in there. And as you know, the longer the process went on, year after year after year, the more I felt free to put myself in there. And I think the more it became necessary, because you needed my story. You know, what was going on with this woman who was taking this time to write this book? I mean, who was this person who was spending all this time with this old midwife? What is she doing, and why? I think you needed that to understand the arc of Lovie's story as I presented. And of course, then I end up at this birth with Lovie. And I also, yeah, so you need me as your observer there, and you need to know enough about me to know if you trust me as your narrator. I'm the person holding the lens, holding the camera, and showing you Lovie's life. Do you trust me? I needed to give you enough for you to be willing to take my hand and go on this journey with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, spoiler alert, you know, towards the end of the book, you get my own birth story, and which was inspired. I had a home birth with a midwife, not Lovie, but totally inspired by the years I had spent with her. And that seemed completely relevant to the story I was telling of Lovie. And it also was clear to me by the time I got to that I had an ending.
Yeah.
You know, what else can I give you? I've been on a birth with Lovie, and here's the story of my own baby's birth. There was nowhere else for the book to go at that point, except for there's an epilogue that tells you the end of Lovie's story. But as far as how much of me to put in there, that was hard. Telling my religious story, you know, I was raised Catholic, and then moved away from Christianity as a young adult, and just figuring out a way to tell that wasn't, you know, off-putting, but that gave you enough for you to understand my reactions to Lovie when she kept coming at me with, "Are you in church, Lisa? Are you back in church?"
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot easier. See, I really commend you for all writing memoirs. I have to say, I found that the hardest part of the whole book was writing about myself. It was much easier to write about this other person. She just leapt out at me as a character. Um, I knew exactly what I wanted to say about her usually and how I wanted to do it. But writing about myself was harder. So kudos to all of you.
Yeah, there are definitely challenges and rewards for writing a memoir.
Yeah.
Did you struggle with your role in Lovie's life and ever feel like you were crossing any boundaries when you were asking her questions and writing about her life?
So I asked her about that once and she said, no, I'll tell you if I don't want to say something. But then that was kind of earlier on or in the middle, perhaps. Um, towards the end of my I'll say the research phase with her went until about 2003. So from 1996 to 2003. And towards the end of that period, she made it clear to me that she was getting tired and that my questions were wearying to her. And I've written that into the book, that this came at me and I was surprised, but realized that I should have picked up on some clues earlier, that she was ready to rest. And she also saw her role in that last home birth, as she saw that as giving me what I had asked for, because I had been the one to say, do you think I could go on a birth with you? And so I think at that point it was hard for her to keep having me come with lists of questions. However, she still wanted me to come. She still wanted me to be in her life and to visit. She enjoyed that. And she didn't mind answering questions when I did come, but she wanted to be let off the hook to an extent. So that was the boundary. She was very open with me about her life, more open with me than I think than I know. I know she was more open with me than she'd been with anyone in her life. She told me that several times. Her children remarked on that. It was partly because I was there. I was asking questions. I showed interest and curiosity, and I kept coming back. But so she let me stay in her life. She wanted me to stay in her life, but she did make it clear at a certain point that I needed to wrap things up, at least this coming at her with all these questions. Yeah.
And at what point, you mentioned this birth that you attended with her, and that was a big part of the story, was this tension building. What am I going to be able to witness a birth with her? And it was apparent that it was very important for you to experience that, and that it needed to be part of the story to really give the full story of who Lovie was. How did you determine that was going to be such a cornerstone of the book?
It was just a wish, it was just a desire and a wish. It just seemed like, how can you write a book about somebody where you don't get to see them in action at the one thing that defines them? It seemed like it would be really important. I got lucky though, in that she did find a client, a woman who said yes to not only me coming to meet her, but to being in the room, at her feet at this birth. And it was a twist that I just couldn't have been happier. Lovie had been, in the later years of her career, most of her clients were white, with the civil rights movement and Medicare coming in. African-American women who had been shut out of hospitals and conventional medicine were welcomed in by doctors who saw the potential for paying clients. So, when the government paid, they said, "Fine, we'll take you," because it was something they could rely upon. So then, her home birth practice waned, but picked up again when some conservative Christian women started getting interested in home birth. Like there was the occasional hippie too. All of these were white women. And then a Mennonite community moved into Eastern North Carolina and were very interested in getting Lovie services. So, but those women were from very traditional conservative families, and their husbands were quite protective of the family, and they were quite private. But then there was this other conservative Christian family that weren't Mennonite that were finding out about home birth through their Mennonite neighbors. This is the family that said yes to me. And in fact, were happy to have me come because they could see how old Lovie, it wasn't the age itself, but they could see her getting frail, and they were worried about her making the 30-mile drive to get to them in the winter. This baby came in February. Would she be able to make it? And so I had said, well, I would come and drive with her. I would drive her. And that's kind of what made it possible. And they had a good feeling about me being there. So yeah, could I have written the book without it? I suppose, but I think it wouldn't have been quite as good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And during this process, you mentioned that you had a tape recorder with you when you first went, and I was wondering if you could give us some insight in how you recreated the dialogue, and how did you use these tapes that you made. I know that when we try to just recreate dialogue, if we recreate it word for word as it actually happens, it doesn't sound believable, which is a strange contradiction. So I think with any writing, you have this balancing act of editing out the ums and the pauses and these stumbles, and still making it seem very natural. And so could you give us some insight into how you approached this?
So there's two things. One is that I did use a tape recorder on nearly every visit, and I recorded quite long stories of Lovie's. Okay. And so I put some oral narratives into the text as such. They're in italics some of the time, but they're separated out. You can tell this is a tape recorded interview. I think you can tell. There's that, and then there's some dialogue between Lovie and me. That's not from tape recorded anything. It's just things that I would later go and write in my notebook. So let me address both. With the tape recorded interviews, yes, they were edited, I would say lightly, and sometimes moderately, not heavily. Sometimes I would get an interview one year and another one another year that touched on the same subject, and I might combine them. I might take the strongest bit from one and combine it with the strongest bit from another. Certainly I edited out false starts unless they were revealing of a hesitancy on her part that seemed significant. And then the dialogue, the things that happened between us, I mean, she just quipped lines left and right. I don't know that I did a lot of editing of her. I probably did more editing of me because I was probably embarrassed by the way I sounded the first time around. And plus I couldn't remember what I said. I mean, can you remember what you say? You remember what the other person said, right? I mean, that's how it is with me. I feel like it's a lot easier to remember what somebody says to me or in front of me than what I said. So I would say probably, the reconstruction of dialogue, it was more me remembering quite closely what Lovie had said, and then me maybe inventing what I had said, but inventing it in a true way. It was an authentic, an honest effort to get at the truth of that encounter, right? So I didn't make up encounters between us ever. But yes, I took some liberties in reconstructing dialogue because I couldn't necessarily always remember what I had said. And maybe sometimes I did, and I didn't like it. No, I mean, I remember one dialogue in particular that's in the book, which I actually I find it really cringy, but where we're talking about Jesus and Lovie, wanting me to view Jesus the same way that she does. And probably some of the things that I say in the book are not exactly what I said in person. That's probably where I took the most liberties, was just trying to figure out, what do you call it? When you consolidate.
A synopsis or...
We had all these different conversations about faith. So I probably tried to just
condense.
Yeah, or come up with a, you know, one that was representative.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Some of our memoirists are, as part of their memoirs, are going to interview their relatives, and I think that this applies to. I think you also interviewed, just besides Lovie, you also interviewed some other her clients and some of her relatives. Can you tell us a little bit about how that process went for you, and give us any tips on things that worked well or didn't work so well?
Well, if I had to do it over again, I would have started that process sooner. I relied for a long time on just Lovie and her word. And a couple of the doctors that knew her died by the time I got around to even thinking about interviewing them. So that's a pity. I would have liked their perspective. Yeah, I interviewed one African American client of hers. Um, I did get her. She told me the story of her birth that Lovie helped her with. I don't know how that could have gone any differently than it did. Um, she was a working class Black woman, and I was a middle class white woman, and probably it was the first time she'd ever been interviewed, and she did it. I loved how she told the story. You know, I I imagine she didn't tell me everything that she would have told a friend of hers, for example, but I don't know how to get around that, given, you know, that she didn't know me, and I'm white, and so I got the storyline that I was interested in, which is, you know, how did Lovie handle things? But her perspective in telling the story may have been quite different if she had been telling the story to someone else. So I'm very aware of that. I interviewed Lovie's children, adult children that were living. I didn't put everything in the book that I could have from those interviews by far. A lot of her parenting, very harsh parenting style came out. It didn't seem to be relevant. It seemed clear to me, and I think I made it clear, that her priority was more midwifery than her kids, although she loved them dearly. I think she would say that she maybe shortchanged them. She would have maybe said that, but she also would have said she did what she thought she needed to do. So I didn't see the need to go into a lot of the horror stories. What for me, for my generation, were kind of horror parenting stories. And yeah, I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah. Did they give you any insights into Lovie that you wouldn't have gotten just through talking to her?
The parenting style. I mean, just, you know, she didn't tell me all of these things, and she didn't tell me the whole story either. There were some things that happened after her husband died, some challenges that she had with her kids. You know, there were great gaping holes that she left out that her children filled in, but that I chose not to tell in the book. I didn't feel like I needed to reveal all of that. So it didn't seem relevant to her story. And it seemed like I would be sensationalizing some material that was, I mean, there was enough that was pretty sensational in there. You know, there's some pretty sensational things that happened in her life. One of her daughters married a man who, after he married another woman, he shot and killed her, and then shot and killed himself while I was at Lovie's house. This was just down the road while we were waiting on this baby's birth. There were things like that I do mention in the book because, you know, they happened while I was right there. But then there was other things that I just felt like, you know, this isn't really a part of the story that I need to be telling.
And did any of them ask you to leave them out of the book? Were there any characters in her life that asked you this?
No, they didn't. In fact, I think her children were flattered to be in the book, and I did check with them all to make sure that they were okay with what I was doing. So I think they liked being mentioned. And I did get interview release forms for the African-American woman that I interviewed, the client, and anybody that I interviewed formally. My publisher required that of me. Some of them I had to get retroactively because I was never great about getting them when I should have. The names, and all the names in the book are the real names, except for where people, where we would meet people together, Lovie and I would find out their name, but then I never met them again or got permission to use their name. So like she would be talking to a former client in the grocery store, and I do know their name, but then I would go home and change the name because I was never going to find that person again. And then I changed the names of the doctors that she was mentioning, because they were all dead, but I didn't want their relatives coming after me for any reason. So I changed all of their names. And that's mentioned in the, what do you call it? The page at the beginning with all that information, whatever that's called, but that, some names have been changed for whatever reason. Yeah.
So I think the primary story arc was Lovie's, was definitely Lovie's relationship with her passion, which was being a midwife, and how she became a midwife, and how she was inspired to do this. And I think that was part of why you probably left out some of the information about her parenting. Did you find it difficult to find that thread, to identify that story arc, or was it pretty clear to you?
Oh, I mean, it took years. It took writing and writing and rewriting and writing and writing. And when I finally had a structure, I don't even know if I recognized it as a structure. I mean, it was just kind of a back and forth between the historical material and the present moment of Lovie and my relationship. So yeah, that was hard for sure. But once it fell into place, it became kind of obvious. Okay, I'm telling this story of Lovie's life, career arc, facing retirement, semi-decline, at the same time that I'm telling the story of me meeting her, my relationship with her, the intensity of trying to figure each other out, some of the tensions, me going on this birth with her, and me having this home birth with a midwife. As I'm talking, if you can't see me, I'm doing this, rainbow arc thing with my hand from left to right for these two intertwined storylines. And then the other one is the story of midwifery in North Carolina and story of home birth. So yes, there were like several arcs, and then they were intertwined, and I would sort of alternate chapters, and that seemed to make sense to me. But certainly I struggled with how to do that for a long time. And I wrote way more than I needed to. I had a contract with University of North Carolina Press for 320 pages, I think, and I turned in 500. They told me, go ahead, we'll cut it down later. But, then there was that process of getting rid of a certain amount of the material, and retaining the structure that I had created.
And do you have any tips or?
I think it's always better to overwrite.
Yeah.
Don't hold back, get it all in there. Because you can always cut it out later. I mean, it's certainly easier to cut it out later than it is to write it on the spot. So I would say write everything you can think of that feels relevant, that you're interested in, that you care about, that you want to write. And then worry about cutting it out. I was lucky enough that I had, so there was an editor and then an assistant editor, and the assistant editor was tasked with going through and saying, do we need this? This seems like a duplication. This seems like a repetition. I think this could go, thank God I had somebody like that to go through the manuscript with a fine tooth comb and help me get down from 500 pages to 320. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to do that by myself. I mean, then I had to go through and say, yeah, I agree, or I don't agree. But it was really great to have that.
And were they provided to you from the University of North Carolina Press?
Right. Those editors were on the staff of the University of North Carolina Press. So I had a university publisher. They weren't, I would say, super accustomed to dealing with books like mine. They did a great job, I thought, with walking me through that process of whittling the book down. Um, I don't know how it is. I can't speak to how it would be if you were with a commercial press, because I've never published with a commercial press. But I think I think they were as hands on as they could be given the nature of their enterprise. Um, yeah, I'll put it that way.
And how did you decide to use the University of North Carolina Press? And how did that process go? Did you reach out to them before or after you'd finished writing?
I got really lucky, honestly. So I was living in Durham, North Carolina, and there's a small documentary studies community with folklorists in there, and people just hear things. So the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke, um, the editor there, Iris Tillman Hill, contacted me, gosh, maybe early 2000s, and said, I hear you have this project. I'd like to talk to you about it. You know, I don't even know. I think she might have heard about it through a friend of mine. But in any case, we started talking. She was very interested in it. I was very interested in them. They publish in conjunction with the University of North Carolina Press. They do something in tandem. And but then I got cold feet with, not with those presses, but with just the project. And I sort of dropped out of the picture, lost contact with Iris for some years. And then I guess it was when my daughter started first grade, 2010, 2011, I think. I got back in touch with Iris and said, I'm still working on this. I want to finish it. Are you still interested? And she said, yes. So I started feeding her chapters and getting feedback from her and her colleague. And then at a certain point, they just handed over a certain amount of chapters to UNC Press without talking to me first. I was kind of horrified because I didn't feel like it was ready, but thank God they did, because UNC Press offered me a contract. And if it were up to me, I'd probably still have been writing on it, you know, for years to come, because I didn't know when to stop. And I wanted it to be perfect before it got handed over to UNC Press. And it wasn't, but it was good enough to get a contract. I landed the contract in 2014, turned it over then a year later in 2015, and it was published 2016. And getting the contract was really what, you know, gave me the motivation to just finish it. All of the chapters that I had left to the end, which were the historical ones, let me say, because that's not my favorite part, the midwifery history stuff. I didn't find it uninteresting. I just didn't want to write it. So that stuff got left to the end. And then when I got that contract, that was the kick in the pants that I needed to just finish it.
And did they do any marketing for you? Did you have to do your own marketing?
They did some marketing for me. Absolutely. Again, I can't say how much a commercial press would have done because I haven't had that experience. They asked me, they gave me a survey, an author survey to fill out, indicating what publications I would like to have ads taken out in, who did I see as the audience for the book, who was the constituency that I wanted to reach. That was a useful process for me to give them information about who I thought they could market the book to. And then they bought some ads, I think mostly in midwifery journals. They sent out lots of review copies to the book, which did result in a few, not so much in reviews, but a few nice mentions here and there, like the Charlotte Observer, you know, the paper for the biggest city in North Carolina. I don't know if it's the biggest paper, but let's say it is. Wrote a nice little thing towards Christmas in that year, right when it came out, saying, you know, 5 books that I can't wait to read, or something like that. That Lovie got to be one of them, and it got a nice little mini review or write up in a magazine called The State, which is a magazine for North Carolina. So they did that, and they gave me a small travel budget to go on a book tour. And when I say small, it was $500, which didn't cover the plane ticket to get from Munich to North Carolina, but it was a nice gesture. And they helped me with the book tour. They helped me a lot with the book tour. They contacted bookstores on my behalf and arranged readings. So that was quite a nice thing to do. Yeah.
Excellent. And how have the sales been on the book?
For a university press book, good. For a commercial book, yeah. They have been quite pleased. UNC Press has been quite pleased. And it did go from hardback to paperback. I'm not sure if they do that with all their books, but I was happy that Lovie did go from hardback to from, I guess they call it cloth, to paper. So that was nice. But it's, what I've earned on this book, the first check covered the copies of the books that I bought for myself and my family and all the people that I felt like I owed a book to because they'd helped me. It's not, it was never a money-making prospect. And my earnings from 2020 were so little that they said, we're going to roll that over to next year. It's not enough for us to cut you a check for this year. So it's not, it's just not a money-making prospect, but I never expected it to be. I feel good that the book is out there. And I'm grateful that they picked it up. It's such a strange hybrid of a book in a way that I don't know if it was commercially viable. I don't know if a commercial press would have picked it up. I did try to get an agent. I'll tell you that. I sent out, this was maybe in 2007 or something like that. I sent out letters to maybe 5 different agents that I had researched who seemed like maybe they handled books like mine. I got outright rejections or non-answers from everybody but one, who's the guy whose name I'm forgetting, John somebody. He was the agent. He's dead now. I think he died the year after he rejected me. No connection. He's the agent for Into the Woods, John Krakauer, Into the Woods and Into Thin Air. He asked to see the first 50 pages. So he liked my letter, my synopsis, my pitch. Mm-hmm. So I took that as a win, even though after he read it, he sent a lovely rejection. Love the writing. It's really quite good. I just can't see who the audience is. That was his response. So I'm going to have to pass. But that's just, and I never sent out any more agent letters after that. Perhaps a bit discouraged, but also just, I had to work on the book some more. It felt like I needed to just write the book. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you said it earlier that you're working on another book now, which would be your second book, correct?
Right.
And did you say it was a young adult?
Yes, young adult.
And do you have any, would you go to the University of North Carolina Press again, or do you have in mind what you'd like that publishing process to look like this time around?
I think I'm contractually obligated to offer them the book because that's in my contract, but they won't want it, and I wouldn't want them to have it because they're not the right press for that, and they wouldn't think that they were either. So I would probably just, pro forma send them a letter saying I'm working on this and I'm going to bypass you, and they'll say fine. Okay. But no, I would like to find a commercial press, but I know this is a super hard market to crack into. I'm just going to work on it with the hopes that I can do it and see what happens.
Wonderful. I think you've covered all of the questions that we came up with in the book club. And does anyone in the audience have any questions?
Lisa, I'd just like to ask the difference in your writing process between the memoir and what you're doing with the young adult, the YA, because the genres are so different, the topic is so different. Do you find yourself going back into memoir mode at all, or do you find that the transition for you has been really quite easy to handle? And then what does your current writing process look like?
I'll answer the last part first. So I do morning pages every morning, Julia Cameron artist way style. That's kind of a religion for me, or it's something I just do. I roll over and grab my notebook. It's the first thing I do every morning. I rarely miss a morning. So I do that just to kind of clear the mind. And my process is in transition at the moment because I've recently rediscovered free writing and writing with prompts. And so what I'm trying to do is at least a half an hour a day of free writing on subjects connected to my novel, but sometimes asking myself a question about the novel, or interrogating a character, or putting a character on the spot, or putting my character in a particular situation, and then just free writing. By that, I mean keeping my hand moving across the page, not stopping to cross out or edit. And then I go to the computer and I try to create something that will actually be usable. And I go through those handwritten pages that I've done to see, what are there some nuggets there that I can use? And sometimes there are, and sometimes there aren't, but usually there's at least something that I want to come back to. I'm in a writing group that meets every 2 weeks. There are 4 of us. We're all novelists, all first-time novelists, although some of them have completed, none of us have published a novel. One person has self-published a novella. Somebody else has completed a novel. This is her second. So, but we're all unpublished novelists, you could say. But that's a really great group for me because it gives me at least a target, for every couple of weeks, where, I've got to show them something that really feels like it's in the novel, not just, me messing around on the page, which is valuable. So that's been useful. And that's part of my process. I've got a binder where I've printed out everything that feels like it might go in there, and I keep it in the order that I think it might go in. And every now and then I look through it to see if I get any more ideas or if I want to shift something around. It's a 3-ring or 2-ring Sturman 2-ring binder, and I can just move things around. And I make sure that one section ends on one page and another section doesn't begin until the next page, because then I can, they're independent and I can move them around more easily. I want the freedom to be able to shift things around. And my sections are quite little at this point. Then I'm not even calling them chapters yet. So that's my process. And yes, it's really different because I get to make stuff up left and right, and it's fun. It was easy to go visit Lovie, to just write in my notebook things that would happen to her, things she would say. Then the hard part was making it all work and writing myself into the story, as I've mentioned, writing the midwifery history. And this is just really different because there's just nothing except for what I come up with in my own mind, and that's freeing on the one hand, and it's harder on the other hand. And I'm having fun. I'm liking it. I don't slip into memoir mode. I mean, my main character has some connection with my biography and some connection with my personality, but not greatly. So it's more an inspiration for me than I wouldn't call it an autobiographical novel, for example. I hope that answered your question, but if it didn't, you can ask it again.
I think it did. Jessica?
I didn't realize I was on mute, but yes, it did very well. Thank you.
Well, wonderful. Thank you. It's been so helpful hearing your insight into your writing process and getting some tidbits of information about interviewing and dialogue, and really appreciate you taking the time to come talk with us today, Lisa. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. It was really fun to be here.
And best of luck on your writing endeavors. And I'm sure we'll see you in other classes coming up. I'm looking forward to taking more classes from you.
Great. Love to have you. And good luck to all of you. I am excited to read every one of your memoirs.
Thank you. This is going to be the year we finish. I don't know about all of us. Yeah, all of us. We'll finish.
Natalie looks terrified.
Guys. I just signed up for a class called This is the Year I Finished My Book. So I'm charged up about it. I've been working on mine. I've been saying 8 years, but I think I've been saying 8 years for a couple of years. So, so I feel your pain about worrying if it's going to be finished, but I feel closer than ever and more confident that 2021 will be the year that happens.
You'll get there.
So thank you so much.
Welcome. Thank you.
Take care. Have a wonderful night, everyone.
Yeah, have a great night, everyone. Thank you again, Lisa. And thank you so much, Christina, for all of your effort in putting in the questions and moderating tonight's Memoir Mentors chat with Lisa. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, all information for Lisa's book, Memoir Mentors, and everything else will be in the podcast description and the show notes.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.